Even if you're someone who lives on a remote island in the middle of the Pacific and has never been interested in cars, you'll know a Porsche 911 when you see one. It's a design language that's been hammered in by Porsche for 60 years. A silhouette that stood the test of time and been refined to perfection since its inception in the 1960s. I can't think of any other car with a stronger identity than the Porsche 911. Design trends have come and gone. The soft, round volumes of the 60s, the boxy geometric shapes of the 70s and 80s, into the melted cheese era of the 90s. And even though it must have been very tempting, the 911 did not follow any of them. Instead, they stuck to their original formula, which has led up to one of the greatest 911s of all time, the 2024 Porsche 911 ST. Before we go in and have a look at the design of the Porsche 911 ST, I want to show you what it's all about from this article from Car and Driver. So it's not quite as extreme and track focused like the GT3 RS. The 911 ST stuffs the 518 horsepower 4-liter engine from the RS into the body of a 911 GT3 Touring, and it comes with a manual transmission. I think this is just the perfect combination to create the ultimate driver's 911 that is a little bit more livable than the track-focused cars. It's a celebration of 60 years anniversary of the 911. Production of the limited edition will be capped at 1,963 cars, since this is the year the 911 was born, and pricing will start at $291,650. Porsche is targeting a blend of the raw track-focused performance version of the 911, the GT3 RS, with the nature of the GT3 Touring. It's more designed for the back roads than the track. So the engineers working on the car developed a new clutch exclusively for the ST, so you have a shorter gear ratio. And I do think that's a great idea, because Porsche 911s, when it comes with manual, they have very long gears, so you don't get the joy of shifting through the gears too much when you're just driving at legal speeds. But I do think that will change with the 911 ST. It goes from 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds with a top speed of 186 miles per hour. It's slower than a PDK automatic GT3, but that's not what this is all about. This is about the complete package coming together, and sometimes it's actually better to have a bit of a slower car with a more connection between the driver and the car itself. And here you can see the gorgeous interior. We do have the cloth inserts in the middle. I do think this looks so classy. We're gonna have a look at this more in detail when we jump into Photoshop. You have the hood, roof, front fenders, and doors are all made of carbon fiber reinforced plastic. The car also comes standard with magnesium wheels. The ST tips the scale at about just over 3,000 pounds, making it 70 pounds lighter than the GT3 Touring. You don't have this big GT3 wing in the rear, and I think that cleans everything up a little bit. And here's Rosie just covering up the camera. You also have the carbon fiber bucket seats. As standard, you can option for the 4-way adjustable sports seats at no extra cost. You have 20-inch wheels in the front and 21s in the rear. I personally would always like to have the same size wheels front and back. Interior has cloth seat centers in classic cognac with black pinstriping. It looks fantastic in this car. I think it just brings back some of that traditional feel that you have in the interior of Porsche 911s. So with that said, I want to show you what makes the 911 so special by going through this generation here. As I said in the beginning, we have a lot of trends coming and going throughout the decades from the 60s up until today. There have been a lot of car design trends. But have a look at this red line that we have going through the design of the 911. They stuck to their core identity. And how many cars can say that they've done that for 60 years? And I think that is part of the reason why the 911 is such an iconic design. Up top, we do have the 1964, and even here you can see the connection to the current car that we have in 2024 with the sloping roofline dipping down, not really coming back up in this case. We do have some Porsches with this gorgeous ducktail integration in the rear, which I love, but for the 1964, I think just having it clean like this looks absolutely fantastic. Then we go into the next generation here. here, which has a bit of a refinement to the first generation. I do think it got a little bigger, but the key features obviously still here intact. I could basically sketch the same lines going through all these generations. This is the 993, the last air-cooled Porsche 911, looking so cool, and I love the angle that we have on the windshield. It's a pretty distinct angle here before we have this corner, and then of course the same dip down to the back. And what I want to bring your attention to here as we go through these generations is just have a look at the taillights and how it slowly moves upwards through the generations. I do think that has to do something with regulations. As you can see here, for example, they all of a sudden placed the taillights a lot higher than they did in the previous generations. And as I said, I do think that has something to do with regulations. We still have the very nice clean lines of the 911 in the 996 right here. We can see that everything has been stretched out. The wheelbase is still very, very small, and this is something that they changed with the next generation, because look at this. In the 2013 911, you can see that the wheelbase got a lot bigger or longer, and the entire car now become more stretched out. We have more of a muscle over the rear axle, but we still have the original lines, of course, intact. We also have more of an upswing in the greenhouse right here, and less of an angle in the front end, more of a continuous curvature now before it dips down into the rear. We also have very slim taillights sitting in a similar position that we have in the 996, and we also have a sharp line right here at the bottom cutting through this entire design, wrapping it in this lower section with one single line, looking nice. This is the latest generation of the 911. You can see this is the 992, came out in 2020. And you can see just how far up the taillight has moved now in relation to the first 1964. I actually made a redesign of this 911 because I wanted to see what would it look like if we moved down the taillights to its original position. That was a pretty interesting design challenge, and that video is available on the Sketch Monkey channel. Just search the Sketch Monkey 911 and that redesign should pop up. But again, we still have the exact same lines that we have in the original 1964 design, with the sloping line up top and very simplistic and smooth surfacing all around the car. And that is what makes a Porsche 911 a Porsche 911. And by the way, I do love this spec that we have with the bronze wheel in combination with the red. So now this is the latest 911, and as we talked about, this is the 911 ST. And I think this is such a cool idea because you take the exterior design of the track-focused GT3 RS and then bring it down a little bit with the internal pieces. So it's more of a road-friendly or more of a livable car, as they said in the article, than the hardcore track-focused versions. But we still have this wider body, as you can see right here, sticking out. More on that when we look at the side view. I also love that we still have the round headlights up top. We do have some functional air scoops or vents in the hood, so the air probably flows in right here and then shoots up on top of the hood like this to bring some sort of downforce to the front end, meaning that this entire piece acts as an internal wing of the front end, looking very, very cool. We also have the white wheels, 19s in the front and 20s in the rear. You can see the difference here when we look at the side view, just how much of a difference it is in the size of the wheels. And when you see it, it's sort of hard to unsee. I just want to have the same size wheel. So if we copy, let's see what happens if we copy this size wheel that we have in the rear end and just smack it on to the front. So this is what I want it to look like. I think this looks way more natural, and also the proportions just work better when you have the same size wheels front and rear. But let's bring it back to stock with the 19s in the front. And here you can clearly see this line that goes from the indicator in the front end fender, cutting through the axle, and then comes back in the middle of the car into the door and creating this wider body. We also have an air vent right behind the front axle. We have some aerodynamic features in the lower section, but we're lacking the wing from the GT3 RS. And I do think, again, that this looks cleaner. We still have all the other aerodynamic features from the GT3 Touring, and I also love this graphic that we have on the side with the 63 and then Porsche underneath, looking fantastic. This is one of the few cars that I think looks good with a little splash of chrome around the greenhouse. You can see that here. You can option to have this in black, but I'm not sure if I would pick black in this case, because I think this just brings back the classic Porsche 911 feel to this 911 ST, and I think it looks really good, especially with the ceramic brakes and this sort of vintage color that we have in this case. We also have a huge cut in the rear end, which we can have a better look at right here, looking at it from the rear. I love this new treatment of the taillight graphics that we have on the ST, looking very slim and very classic. I think this still is a timeless design because we're keeping the original proportions from the 1964. We also have this big cut in the lower section coming from the GT3. I'm not so sure if I do like this center installed tailpipes. I probably want to have them be at the very ends like this, more traditional than this. This still looks good, but in my personal opinion, I would much rather have the tailpipes sitting at the end points of this beautiful diffuser that we have in the lower section. I love this line that we have on Porsches, dipping down into the taillights. You can see that we have a slight chamfer going around the window in the rear end as well, looking great, sort of housing the rear window in a nice way. And last but not least, we do have the gorgeous interior. Very classic looking interior. We have a housing for the gauge cluster, looking great. The steering wheel is not bombarded with 50 different buttons on it. You do have a couple of buttons. Looks like you have some radio buttons and maybe some cruise control down here for this stock, and that's about it. And last but not least, we do have the 6-speed manual with a new gear ratio. That means you'll be able to shift through the gears more in speeds under 60 miles per hour, and that is what you want when you take this on the back roads. Then you have an infotainment system in the middle, looking decently integrated. I don't have any complaints about this really, because you do have some physical buttons down here, in addition to some physical toggles right in front of the gear shifter. And this color combination is just beautiful. I would not want to have leather in the seats. I would definitely keep the fabric feel that we have in this case for the 911 ST. The 2024 Porsche 911 ST is a car that we all need right now. It kind of gives me hope. In a world where cars are becoming less like timeless pieces of art and more like anonymous pieces of consumer electronics, the 911 ST shows that if we combine a deep passion for automotive design and engineering with modern technology, we can still have that magical connection between man and machine that seems to be a thing of the past. Hopefully, the ST will inspire other manufacturers to explore similar ideas in their lineups.